Welcome back to the Product Operations Summit. Before we get going with the next session, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this awesome event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more content from past and future events on demand by becoming a PLA member. Head on over to productledalliance.com for more information. Enjoy the next session.
Hey there, folks, and welcome to my home in Bend, Oregon. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Lindsay Bell. I head up product operations at Rapid API. I'm excited to talk about something that, as an operational professional, I am very passionate about: operating models. I brand myself as someone who focuses on the obvious, like bringing things back to basics, like what is operations? And the best way for my mind to break that kind of thing down is with a model and its dimensions. This is what we will spend our time together covering. Firstly, I'd like to set the stage with what an operating model isn't, to potentially remove any assumptions from this audience. Seems like everything lately has operations or strategy tacked on after it, but as leaders, when we get to running our businesses, defining teams, our language and what things aren't becomes increasingly important. I'm finding that it's also important in our product operations space as our growth has been exponential. How we speak about what we do is very important. Now, this is not to say some of the items listed here are not relevant to an operating model. But none of these things individually drive an operating model solely. So let's talk about what an operating model is and its purpose for an R&D organization. So when we first dive into investigating what is an operating model, just give it a Google, you'll hear lots of things. In the most simple terms, an operating model is how a business turns input into output. In more complicated terms, and to paraphrase Slack and Lewis quote here, an operating model is the method used to influence performance objectives like quality, speed, dependability, flexibility, and cost. And the method also used to promote quality decisions based on things like capacity, process, organizational development, supply network, process technology, resource usage, etc. I definitely prefer the simple version, how we turn input into output, but some of us may have a bad reaction to input and output, so let's change that. Rather than input into output, you can think effort to outcome, or what I'll use for the remainder of our time, execution to strategy. A target operating model is just that, the target. It's what we strive to have, our North Star. All R&D operating model strategies should be malleable, therefore always looked at, refreshed, always a target. Anything that's firmly defined, I don't think is flexible enough for what agile R&D functions require. I use the word strategy tacked on at the end here because what I'll review today will sketch out high-level thoughts that support a chosen model and the dimensions that support a chosen model. A target model is highly dependent on primary modes of input and desired output, like how mature is a company, what growth stage is it in, how operationally mature is input single-threaded, multi-threaded, is output static or dynamic, lots of things. But what we're really trying to get to is what greases the machine best. How much or how little process integration or how much or little process standardization varies on an organization. We could spend hours teasing that apart. There's lots of different types of operating models, 4 of which in a matrix that'll tell a good story there. But our core behind why needing an R&D operating model is to bridge execution and strategy, to minimize deviations and maximize adjustments over time. While I'm sure a few of you are looking at this image and translating into what it means for product organizations, like who own what process and why, let's spend our time today focusing on the building blocks or the dimensions of the operating model to level set. So we'll choose a few to look at. A lot of smart people before us have defined a lot of these things, those people with failures and successes over many, many years. None of this is new and certainly not defined by me. We are just here to continue the impactful work to evolve business into the next iteration. Dimensions are the things that, when they work together, enable the meaningful intention of the model. And reminder, bridging strategy and execution. Firstly, we'll look at a potential optional organizational model dimension. I'll give folks a moment to read the snippet. Some folks may have heard you ship your org chart. This is Conway's Law. To sum it up, Conway states that the information silos we experience in an organization actually translate directly into end user experience. If you think about an org with poor alignment, maybe from your own experience or from the outside, there's a lot of building over another without understanding one another. Wham, angry customers. Wham, tech debt load to your ears. Siloed products, even with similar customer sets, have inconsistent customer experiences, challenges for cross-sell, monolithic architectures, the list goes on. How are skill sets deployed to reflect the outcomes that we want to see? What design do we establish to promote cohesion for ourselves and, in turn, our customers? Taking a step back, a question: who cares in an R&D organization? Who cares about the things on the screen here? It's not a trick question. If you thought, well, product cares about that and Eng only cares about that, I hate to be so definitive in this statement, but you are wrong. There's a lot of talk out there about healthy tension between product and engineering. I disagree with that statement strongly. To bring an analogy into it, muscle tension, when purposeful and intentional, builds strength, builds muscle. When it's not, you end up with a crick in your neck from whiplash. And going back to the intention of our R&D operating model, tying execution to strategy, all of the things in these bubbles affect our direction and focus. All of these things have to be intentional to move in the right direction together. As such, the entire R&D team should care about these things. That's why for R&D organizations, it's important to think in teams over functions. Functions being product, engineering, design. And going back to Conway's Law, if product cares about things that are separate from what engineering cares about, our strategy course is going to deviate big time. Not to mention the time wasted finger pointing on who did and didn't do what. Of course, there are many layers to consider in an organizational model, like domain expertise, ownership definitions for scale, locations and time zones, physical offices. This is an ecosystem of people, and at the core, our skill sets when we deploy them are drivers of execution and strategy, our teams. It's critical as operational professionals and product professionals to understand and coach a healthy model with your leaders to design an organization that promotes cohesion for ourselves and our customers. The one that I feel that's had the greatest impact in my career is an N in a box model, because it could be 2, 3, 4, depending on your organization. At Rapid API, we promote a 3 in a box, which includes product, engineering, and design partnership at all levels of the organization, from heads of to SVPs to VPs to product managers, engineering managers, and design managers. OKRs are set together, roadmaps are built together, our direction in the same direction. This model is supported by how we talk about strategy and execution, which brings us into our next dimension, operational cadences. Operational cadences are points in time in which we talk about strategy, execution, team going on a fairly consistent basis. It allows us as a team to make visible a vision, a strategy, plans broken into work, manage the flow of work to identify all things coming our way, all the places we want to go, ways to get there, to prioritize effectively, to attempt to make the biggest impact in the right time with our effort, and to adjust based on new learnings and to be the catalysts for change and innovation. These tenets help us keep up with our high demand in a healthy, sustainable way, ideally making room for consistent strategic thought and quality decisions. Let's take a look at what an example operational cadence tying strategy and execution can look like. Here we can see various cadences at different points in a quarter that has different discussions in each of these segments. The pace of your operational cadences, the audience of your operational cadences, and the agendas drive the important conversations at the right times. If I take another view of this that perhaps shows the what a little bit more clearly in our yellow boxes here, our teams here make visible progress and prioritize effectively with goals and releases. They measure and manage the flow of work by risk tracking, by understanding dependencies in the intake, as well as observing KPIs and metrics. Our what's here start to bleed into our next dimension, which is process maps. Those folks that have been identified in our 3-in-a-box model, what are we talking about in our whens of operational cadences? How are we talking about it as well? Process maps reduce friction across product, engineering, and design, like our organizational model and our cadences, by establishing how we label and structure things. In favor of balancing autonomy and effectiveness, I suggest only a handful of standard processes, a few to think about. One, a goal-setting framework, I think should be standard. That way your organization can tie outcomes at the portfolio level, and as an individual, you have an understanding of your impact. Another suggestion for a standard process, how a long-range architectural strategy is defined, the North Star architecture, and the engineering and operating practices. The most tangible for an R&D organization looking to bridge execution and strategy, though, is the product and software development lifecycle. You may hear them out in the world known as PDLC or SDLC. How does your organization progress through development cycles with quality practices to experiment, to achieve business outcomes, or to fail for that matter? Here is a blown out view of a product and software development lifecycle process map. Although shown linearly, nobody freak out. More often, you'll see these phases happening in parallel. You'll also iterate numerous times in each phase as you test, hypothesis, learn, and adjust. And if we go back to defining terminology, life cycle means the series of changes in the life of an organism. In this case, the subject is not an organism, but software. It goes through a series of changes in its journeys from being nothing to something that adds values to customers. One of our VPs of product, Gautam, shared this with me and it stuck with me. Nothing to something that adds value to customers. It is important for this process map to be understood to adopt a scientific method mode of experimentation and iteration, which is essential to evolving strategy and understanding trade-offs during execution. Alignment here is also important to understand who does what when and how for quality decisions and development, which is also very impactful to our strategy. If we look at process maps more generally, what they provide is a common language and protocol across functions that can be repeated. And having common protocol and language allows us to then evolve those best practices with learnings through those protocols, just only getting better. It also gives us the opportunity to embody the company DNA and ethos. For example, you can say you're data-driven, but if you have a process map that doesn't support that and doesn't call it out directly, you are not data-driven. Turn words into actions with process maps. Last for today, but certainly not least, the governance dimension. Governance dimension of an operating model captures the business rules, policies, the responsibilities and decision-making structures, forms with an organization, and their jurisdiction. And finally, what we've all been waiting for, product operations owns governing a target operating model. But what does this actually mean? The governance dimension provides the rules by which other dimensions are managed and operated. So interfacing with the operating calendar, business planning cycles, streamlining those into cadences, ways of working, tooling, frameworks, list can go on. If we break that down even further, within product operations, we have pillars supporting that strategy roof, the operating model governance roof. We coach leaders on organizational model recommendations, operational cadences, building and enabling process maps, all to govern the operating model alongside our R&D leadership. So we hold this roof up by bringing in focus areas for quality strategy and execution, like bringing data and insights to the forefront of the R&D teams, establishing tooling best practices to connect and understand R&D efforts and their strategic implication, ensuring a strong customer and go-to-market connection to support the greater business by understanding our customer base and our field folks. Before I close out, I have some remaining remarks, things that are important to include as it relates to this topic. Product operations is a key for the governance, but depending on your organization, there may be a broader bucket of operations. This includes teams like technical program management, learning development, financial operations, agile program management. It's important to call this group out because we all together are the operational architects for an R&D organization, each with their own specialty. It's important that we work together, understand what each other is working on, how we can support the R&D team holistically. I wouldn't want to go through this whole conversation without calling out our important partners. Some other focus areas, if you did enjoy this topic, that you could dive into, or some other dimensions of operating models listed here. Some other related topics that if you were to Google them next to operating models will turn out some really great things. So I'll leave this here for a moment. Cool. And I'll just do a quick recap. So we went through what is an operating model, what it isn't, the importance of language, and the dimensions of the operating model, the 3-in-a-box organizational model, the software development lifecycle process map that establishes how we talk about progress in our work, operational cadences being the when and the right pace of how we talk about those things or when we talk about those things, and the governance, the who and the why and the supporting mechanisms that product operations can support an R&D operating model. I'll leave some sources here. I really appreciate everyone's attention. Thanks so much. This was a blast to create. I'm looking forward to all the deviations I can do off of this and engaging with you guys in the future. So I believe it's Q&A next. If you want to connect, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm also on the PLA Slack channel. Find me, come say hello.
Going to Q&A now. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I could see a note from Emma saying she really appreciated it. Love this. It was so straight to the point. Yeah, really great presentation. But yeah, I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Please take some time to put them in the chat now if you do. I've got a comment saying felt like it was a good conclusion for the festival. I definitely agree. It's been a very jam-packed day. And yeah, this has been an excellent session. Lindsay is, of course, in the Slack channel, but also on LinkedIn. So please do feel free to continue those conversations. Oh, we do have a question. Who would you say are the best allies outside of R&D teams?
Oh, Thibaut, that's a great question. I almost always lead with the go-to-market partners. I can share a little about my journey and why I say that. I was a project manager at a software company before moving into sales and then moving into product operations. And one of the biggest things that I struggled with in my sales role, moving from an implementation person, was why don't I know more about this roadmap and why is it so hard to connect with the product team? It was just, I think a few of us, if you've been in that position, understand that it's a disconnect on either side of that swim lane. So I would say the bond between our go-to-market partners, they're the first in the field with our customers. So in order for us to succeed as a business, they have a lot of great insight. That includes marketing, it includes sales, it includes BDRs or business development representatives or sales development representatives. They have some really interesting insights at the very front reaching out to potential customers. The list goes on, but I would say that that's probably the strongest ally needed.
Amazing. They've got another comment here. Love the call out of the partners in R&D. Have you had experience outlining overlaps and differences?
Yes, Sean, great question. It is, it certainly is a challenge at any organization. I can tell from a little bit about some experiences that I've had to maybe paint a picture. My last role was at Twilio. The technical program management team was a huge partner for product operations, but dependent on the business unit that TPM worked in, they could be doing things of a product operations scope, which created a lot of conflict. I say conflict, maybe friction is the better word. It was important to understand what those differences were, but it was even more important for the leaders to see those differences. So at that point, I was in a product operations manager position. And it was important for me to speak up and make the distinctions on my own with my peers, but also to reach out to my leaders and say, hey, we need your help here because we're churning a lot. In my current position, I have partners in all of those realms that were on the screen. So learning and development, technical program management, and financial operations. When each of our wonderful women leaders joined, we sat down and sketched out what is R&D operations vision and what are our areas. We just went into a Google Doc, outlined what our strengths were. A lot of us had already had strategies put together, kind of figured out where overlaps were and where distinctions needed to be clear. And then we shared that with a broader R&D organization. That being key, other people are not going to know what you do. You are the salesperson of what you do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have another question. Where would you suggest the product ops person reports in an organization for optimal effectiveness?
This is a great question too. And I hate to be that person that says it depends, but it really depends on what function leads your company. So sales-led, engineering-led, product-led. A couple of reasons for that. One is going to be funding and support. Who's getting the largest envelope that can build this effectiveness team? The other layer to that is who's going to support you the most, who understands your value the most, who do you connect with personally the most? So with those two next to each other, it's hard to say. So I report in to an engineering organization because as we were forming our teams, that's where a lot of the velocity was coming from in terms of hiring. We're in an ongoing discussion of, is ops more central? There's PMO opportunity versus embedded in a function, right? We spent a lot of time talking about organizational model of being a team rather than a function. I would say that 3 in a box could also be 4 or 5 to include product operations for embedded, or all the way up to your heads of an organization. That tells you that investment story. I hope that answered your question, Sean.
Amazing. Another comment. Funny you should talk about TPM overlap with product ops. I am a career TPM and only heard about product ops recently. I'm trying to reconcile what I've been doing and whether I have the experience to take on a product ops role.
Yeah, Sean, I would love to chat with you specifically about it and learn more about your experience. So feel free to reach out to me. I would say in the traditional sense, the skills of a TPM translate very well into product operations. Experience with technical teams, organization in general, pushing things over the line. These are all qualities that you need. The hardest part to me in product operations is the adoption of these processes and changes. And a TPM is really good at that and pushing that line.
Awesome. I'm not sure, Sean as well, if you managed to catch it, but earlier we had a panel on transitioning into product ops. So definitely check that out and maybe get in contact with some of the speakers from there as well, because I'm sure they can help. Next question. Can you elaborate a bit more on how you see the differences between TPM and POM? This has been fairly common theme throughout the conference. In my current role, it feels like our definition of POM role is actually both, which is making it difficult to work with the rest of the project organization in an effective way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wish I had my slide up, but I'll try and describe it. So I mentioned the 3-in-a-box teams. Those are your product owners, your direct to customer teams. Those being at, and I'm sorry for the up and down and the bottom top explanation here. It's not by not by any sort of leveling, but if we put those at the bottom of in a rectangle, they own the product portfolio, right? That's what they're developing strategy for. A technical program manager has output out of those teams to own a program portfolio that hits across all of those 3-in-a-box teams or N-in-a-box teams. Product operations, I would put a big square around those two rectangles to say the product and program portfolio are operated by product operations. Difference between ownership and operations being that churn and burn of work. It never ends. It's how we work. It's what we do. We ensure that things are adopted and we create new things and yada, 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 versus in my mind, and maybe it's too simple, but TPM, primarily there's an end date. Now you might say, well, what about like incident management or some things that are ongoing? I would challenge you to say, is that engineering operations or is that really product operations? Who should own that? It's a interesting debate for sure. But I would say product and program portfolio operations versus a program portfolio ownership layer. Cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I think that brings us to an end of today's session. But I just want to say another big thank you to Lindsay for such an incredible session. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in, got involved with the questions. Please do carry on these conversations, both in the Slack channel and on LinkedIn. Lindsay just posted hers there. So do please jump onto that. Keep an eye out on the Product Live. We have lots more events coming up, including more virtual events, and we have some more product ops events specifically in the pipeline as well. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you all again soon, and thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you all so much. Cheers. Have a good one. Get some rest, Ruth. Oh my God.
I will.